me as I was contemplating standing here with you this evening is between yesterday and today. There are persons, there are times when we feel that the story about Jesus Christ is a story that belongs in the past. And like a distant light, it may shine on us, but the light is diminished by the years. I would like to suggest to you that the story of Jesus Christ, rejected by sinful human beings, is a story that is very much current. It is happening all the time. Anytime any person is rejected because of their difference. What Isaiah speaks about, the suffering servant, well describes the despised, the rejected, and the outcasts of all times and places. In preparing, I found this cross downstairs, and I know some of you will have seen it coming into this church before. It's a symbol. And I chose to put at the heart of the cross, where the intersection of the vertical and the horizontal exists, the light. And some of you who have experience with Catholic traditions will know that Jesus is often pictured as one who has a light here in his heart. And sometimes that light is surrounded by a crown of thorns. I was reading Henry Nouwen this week. Henry Nouwen is a theologian, philosopher who has explored the themes of suffering in the gospel. And in reading Henry Nouwen, I realized that he had something important to say to me, and I thought I might pass that along to you. I know many of you, I have had experience with you, and I suspect that most of you at some time in your life have experienced some sense of dismay, some sense of disappointment, some sense of having been chosen for something that you feel you cannot bear. Sometimes some of you have felt forsaken by God, abandoned perhaps, and wondering why. Mr. Nouwen suggests that by getting in touch with that hurt within you, that disappointment within you, and recognizes that it is common to humanity, in recognizing that it's not just happening to you, but what is happening to you is happening to people everywhere and puts you in solidarity with them. So that the isolation, the loneliness, the despair of suffering is spread broad. And Mr. Nouwen says the practice of this realization will lead to the overcoming of all those things which limit and frustrate us. Jesus Christ suffered deeply. Jesus Christ was a person sent from God who loved people, who cared for people, who acted in their best interest, who did what he could to make a difference. And we may be surprised when we read the story again and again. We may wonder, why did they kill him? Now, some folks suggest that they killed him because that's what God wanted. I'm going to suggest to you that they killed him because he did what God wanted and they didn't like it. This past week, Barbara and I, it was on the weekend, we went to Winnipeg, and we had wondered what we might do there, and the one thing that was near the top of our list was go to visit the newly opened Museum of Human Rights. And we made a tour of the place. And it was a bit of an exercise. It's a big place and requires a little bit of fortitude to get from the bottom of it to the top. I remember one of the guides or one of the hosts saying to us, it begins in the dark, but as you climb, it gets lighter. But that climb expects something of you, some energy. I would like to speak just very briefly about some of the things we saw in there. And they can be basically summed up as the cruelty of some human beings concerning other human beings. We saw exhibits which spoke of outrageous and atrocious behavior in which persons, men, women, and children were abused, beaten, jailed, killed, not just one at a time, but sometimes by the thousands and even by the millions. We saw an exhibit that spoke about what happened to indigenous people when Western colonizers went all over the earth to claim what was not theirs as though it was theirs. And wherever they went, they took the people they found and they suppressed them. And they took from them what was rightfully theirs. We saw exhibits from all parts of the world. Exhibits testifying to the deep, dark tendency in human beings to make use of power for selfish reasons. We saw exhibits speaking about the cost of being different, the cost of being a woman. Up until about 100 years ago, women were not even considered persons in a place like Canada. Women were told to mind their place, to keep to their place, and not to step out of line. We saw exhibits about persons who were different for other reasons. We may think in our generation of all those persons who had the courage to come out of closets where they hid their lives for fear of what their families, their friends, their neighbors, and their society would do to them if they should come out. But they did come out. We saw that humanity is not always very attractive. I was led to wonder if it were possible that we are not the most intelligent creatures on the planet, and perhaps, as the scriptures teach, we are a lost and confused human race. But I don't want to linger on the horrors of these various abuses of human right to liberty and to happiness, to peace and to joy. I do not want to castigate those who abused freedom for the sake of power. Because as you climb up in the museum, you begin to notice something. That in every one of the situations where some human beings were behaving atrociously, others were behaving bravely. Others were behaving with courage and conviction to intercede, to try to make a difference, to try to alleviate the suffering of those who had been called unworthy of life by others. Jesus Christ is a person just like us. The light of God's love burned in his heart, just like it burns in ours. And Jesus is for us the exemplar, the light, the one who shows us what God expects from us. And as simply as possible, wherever we see oppression, wherever we see exploitation, wherever we see the abuse of human and non-human nature, Jesus calls us to take a stand. Jesus calls us to make a difference. Jesus calls us to side with the oppressed. Jesus calls us to side with the broken, to alleviate the burden of their life's experience by whatever means we have available. And that sounds terribly complicated, but it's very, very simple. The scriptures say in one place, if you give even a cup of cold water to one of these my thirsty little ones, it is as if you did it for me. That is to say, if you were there that day when Jesus was being marched by the state and by the church to that hill where they were going to kill him, if you were there and you saw Jesus in agony and you reached out your hand with a cup of water to just alleviate his thirst for a second, if you did that, it would make a difference. And if you do that for any suffering person, it is as if you did it to Jesus. If you bring comfort to any wounded human being, it's as if you were there and you brought comfort to Jesus. And it's my belief that on that cross, overlooking those people who rejected and refused him, Jesus' heart was filled with compassion. The last words he said were not, "You people are guilty of sin." The last words he said was, "You people don't understand what you're doing." They were in the dark. They had been seduced by power, and power had taken hold of them, so that power meant more to them than human life. And that's the case wherever power is abused. We now live in a time where we only need to look through our various technologies, through our little windows on the world, and we can see that everywhere just now, human being is suffering because of the misuse and the abuse of power on the part of some. Jesus Christ did not die because God wanted him to die. God wanted Jesus Christ to live. God wanted Jesus Christ to flourish. And we will get evidence of that in 3 days or thereabouts. You see, they couldn't kill him. But he was willing to die. And he was willing to die so that he might draw near to him followers. And that these followers would pick up his mission and become agents of liberation, agents of deliverance, agents of salvation. And I take the word salvation in its most literal ancient meaning: healing, making well that which is sick. I am not speaking about who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. Although all those who follow Jesus will discover that there is a great joy in being faithful to God's purposes. We have sung Jesus, Keep Me Near the Cross. We have sung Beneath the Cross of Jesus. I invite you to open your heart to the possibility that lies before you as a person and us as a community. We can make a difference. But if we make a difference in the way that Jesus Christ shows us, we can expect treatment like that which he got. Because the world powers were not only doing wrong in that time, the world powers continue to do wrong, and it takes courage to say no to them and to say yes to God. Jesus Christ is the light of the world, and that light lives within you. Let it shine, even at the heart of the deep darkness that is coming our way. I'm going to ask you to join in singing. And this song draws us by our imaginations to that place and that day. Were you there? 144.
Were you there?